Alright, welcome back to JavaScript the Basics. In this lesson, we will be reviewing our building blocks section of the course so far. We are going to cover variables, strings, and operators. We're going to do this in a quiz format. I'll bring up some code or a question on our whiteboard. I would then suggest pausing the video. Take some time to think about it. Remember, struggle is good for learning. If you are on your desktop, you can even open up your Chrome browser as you watch the video and do some code if that helps you come up with a solution. When you have given it your best shot, continue the video and we'll look at a solution together. These quizzes won't have new content, so if you are more advanced and you have the topic down, feel free to skip. However, this should be beneficial even to those who have a pretty good understanding of the topic, as it helps to etch into your mind these concepts even further. Let's go ahead and get started with our first questions on variables. Let's look at a quick refresher definition of variables. JavaScript variables are containers for storing data values. You can then refer to the data by naming the container. Here is the first question. Multiple choice. Which is the proper way or ways to declare a variable in JavaScript? A. Color equals the string blue. B. Var color equals the string blue. C. Variable color equals the string blue. Or D. Var color. Go ahead and pause the video for a moment to come up with a solution and then resume the video when you are ready. The answers are A, B, and D. A is a little tricky because it is missing the variable keyword var. However, unless you are running in strict mode, which you probably should, and we'll cover that in future lessons, color will be registered as a variable at the global level. This isn't good practice, but does create a variable. B was probably the most obvious choice to you with the var keyword and assigning it the value of a string blue. C is incorrect. Variable is not a JavaScript keyword, and so our JavaScript interpreter will return an error. Lastly, D is correct. The value of our variable is uninitialized at this point, but it is still a variable declaration. We haven't given it a value, so it returns undefined, which, not to go into too much detail, but undefined is a kind of value in JavaScript anyways. Alright, question number 2. Now we're going to talk about best practices for naming variables. There are ways of coding that are syntactically correct and the JavaScript interpreter can run, but they aren't considered best practice. Which of the following code snippets are best practice and which are bad practice? Go ahead and pause the video, and when you have come up with the solution, resume viewing and we'll look at it together. Alright, best practices would be considered to be C and E, and maybe D. C is written in camel case. Camel case is where we take a variable of multiple words, and because we aren't allowed to have spaces, we squish them together. Then, for human readability, we have our first word in lowercase, and then capitalize the first letter of each of the following words. A is difficult to read because without any words capitalized, it is difficult for the human eye to see the words, and they can even find different words if we don't know where the new word starts. B is close, just off the mark of having the first word in uppercase. Next, we have E as a best practice, and maybe D. The reason we might argue that E is more best practice than D is for human comprehension. Remember, we code for those who are looking at our code along with the JavaScript interpreter. X is shorter and will take less memory, which our JavaScript interpreter likes. But my favorite color allows those working on our code to know why we are working with the string red. Let's look at the next question. This time, I want you to look at the options and spot the invalid variable names. We previously looked at best practice and bad practice. Now, let's look at values our JavaScript interpreter won't even work with. Go ahead and pause the video and pick out the invalid variable names. Feel free to open up the Chrome console and input these if you need help with the solution. Alright, our invalid variable names are A, C, E, and G. A is invalid because variable names may not start with a number. However, as in the letter B, they may follow the first character in the variable name. C is invalid because function is already a JavaScript reserved keyword, so it may not be used for a variable name. E is an invalid variable name as we are not allowed to have spaces. The way to resolve using multiple words is to put them together camel case style as we saw earlier. F is a valid variable as they can also begin with underscore as well as a $sign. Lastly, G is an invalid variable because a variable name cannot have the ampersand symbol. Hope you felt good about the variable review. Now, let's review what we have learned about strings. We'll start off with the definition to remind us. Strings are a data type used to represent text and are wrapped in either a single or double quote. Let's start off with our first question. Which of the following strings will return an error when the JavaScript interpreter attempts to assign the value to the variable? A. Wraps text in two single quotes. B. Text is wrapped in a single and double quote. C. Text is wrapped in a double and single quote. And D. Text is wrapped in two double quotes. Go ahead and pause the video and resume it when you are ready with the solution. Both letters B and C will return errors. While a string can be wrapped in either single or double quotes, as we saw in letters A and D, a string cannot be wrapped in a combination of the two. Our second question will revolve around what to do when our string consists of single or double quotes, such as when people write a contraction or are using quotes in their text. Look at the following strings. Which are valid and which are invalid, and why? Now, I'm not an English grammar expert, so let's focus solely on the single and double quotes and how the JavaScript interpreter handles them. Go ahead and pause the video and come up with your solution. Try throwing them into the console if you need some help. When you are ready with your solutions, go ahead and resume the video. The valid strings are B, C, and E. Invalid strings are A and D. A is invalid because the string contained within two single quotes has another single quote in it. B is valid because within the string designated by two single quotes, we have used double quotes on the inside, so the JavaScript interpreter knows that we are giving our text quotes to be read, not for declaring a string. C is valid because even though we have a single quote within a quote defined by two single quotes, we have used the escape backspace character immediately before it, letting our interpreter know that this is meant to be part of the text that we read. D is invalid for the same reason as A. Only, instead of single quote within two single quotes, we have a double quote within double quotes. Lastly, we have the letter E. This is valid because while we have double quotes within double quotes, as we did with letter D, we have used the / escape character in front of each of the double quotes, letting our interpreter know that we want these double quotes to read as part of the text. Last question. Suppose we want to find the length of a word, and we also want to turn a string into all uppercase. Which options will help you find the length of the assigned value given to the greeting and turn the greeting into all uppercase letters? Go ahead and pause the video until you have come up with the solution, then click play to resume. And the answers are B and F. To turn a string into uppercase, we use the toUppercase method. Because this is a method, we have the parentheses attached to the name. To find the length, we are using the property length. Properties do not have parentheses. As a new developer, as you are still trying to grasp the difference between properties and methods with your eye, you can always tell by the presence or absence of those parentheses. Now, let's close out this review by looking at operators. Let's begin with a definition recap. JavaScript operators are used to assign values, compare values, and perform arithmetic operations and more. Operators allow programmers to create a single value from one or more values. Our first question involves the increment and decrement operator. Look at the following statements and identify the true and false statements. We'll say that x equals 7. For each choice, let's imagine that x resets. The value of x isn't changing as we go down our list of options. We are just looking at how each operator returns the value of x. Go ahead and pause the video and resume when you have come up with a conclusion. Alright, the correct answers are B and D. A is incorrect because the increment operator is after the operand x, so x will return its original value of 7. However, the next time we look at x, it would increase to 8. B is correct because the increment operator is before the operand, increasing the value to 8, then returning it as 8. C is incorrect because the decrement operator would subtract 1 from 7 before returning it for a value of 6. D is correct because the decrement value after the operand will first return the value of 7, then subtract 1 for the next time we look at x. Go ahead and plug those into your console if that is still a little foggy to you. Next, let's look at the modulus operator. What will the following modulus operators return? Remember, the modulus operator is returning the remainder value. Pause the video and work on it in your head or your console. Alright, 9 goes into 34 3 times with the remainder and return value of 7. 4 goes into 12 3 times with the remainder and return value of 0. 2 goes into 9 4 times with the remainder and return value of 1. 4 goes into 15 3 times with the remainder and return value of 3. Now, let's look at the comparison operators. Look at the following options and determine whether they will return true or whether they will return a value of false. Go ahead and pause the video. If you do solve by using the console, try to see the pattern of how the double, triple, and inequality operators work. Resume the video when you are ready to review the answers. Alright, A and D were true, while B and C were false. A is true because we use the double equal sign, which checks for value. JavaScript does something called coercion, where it tries to help us. In this case, it is smart enough to know that the number 8 and the string with the 8 character are the same value. However, for programming reasons, you may not want the interpreter to help you. You may want it to recognize those as not really being the same. That is where the triple equals comes into play. It checks for a value, like the double equals, but it also checks for type. No matter what the value, the number 8 and the string 8 are not the same type, so we return a false value. Now, let's look at C as false. We are using the exclamation mark for the inequality operator. When we attach a single equal to the inequality operator, it works like the double equals, just checking for value. So C is saying that the value of number 8 and the value of the string 8 aren't equal. But that is false because they are equal in value, as we discussed with letter A. D uses the double equal with the inequality operator. In this case, the double equal works like the triple equal, checking for value and type. So D is saying that the value and type of the number 8 is not equal to the value and type of the string with the character 8, which is true. There we go. That's our review for this portion of the course. Hopefully that was a breeze. Even if it was a little challenging, that's okay. Anytime you struggle, it just means that you are continuing to learn. However, if you felt lost most of the time, then it would probably be of value to go through the previous lessons again leading up to this review. Thanks for joining me in this review of JavaScript building blocks, and we'll see you in our next lesson.